His voice still echoes in my head.
I'm Pule Leinaeng from South Africa. I'm still dreaming about home. I was born in South Africa, Bloemfontein. That is the Orange Free State. I was raised there, went to school in the same city, and went to high school in the same city. And when I left from the same city.
Lee left South Africa, together with a group of 11 other comrades in 1960 to build the African National Congress, the ANC, in exile.
I didn't just live by myself, we left in a group.
Some call them the 12 from Bloemfontein, but to me, they were 12 disciples of Nelson Mandela. The last time I saw Lee was when I shot this footage of him celebrating Father's Day in 1999 in the backyard of our house in the Bronx. It seems strange that most of the images I have of Lee were often from Father's Day. He had raised me since I was 9 years old, but I never called him father. Lee died before I could see him in South Africa, the land he fought all his life to liberate. For a whole week, I've seen Lee feted as a hero. Strangers come up to touch me, offering condolences as his eldest son.
He opened up so many different doors for my brother and I. He taught us how to be men. He taught us how to be revolutionaries. He taught us how to be warriors.
Pule means rain in Swana. It's been raining 7 days already. Going through these photographs, I tried to piece together a picture of his past. One image in particular captured me.
Are these people in this picture? This is a new picture.
My God, where do you get this one? I've forgotten about this picture.
This photo, let me see now. Oh, yeah. No, I remember, yeah. Yeah, okay.
So when
yeah.
This photo has
No, now I remember it. I've never seen this one, you know?
It's amazing.
Now the people who are here, that's me here at the corner. That's Dupes, that's Beans, that's Motobi, that's Percy, that's Copes, that's Setai, that's Peter Schwartz, that's Billy Mokonan, that's Taps, that's Majwa, and Lee. Huh?
Who is here?
It's you.
It's amazing.
You don't know yourself, huh?
Lee used to tell the story about his political coming of age in 1952 with the Defiance Campaign. One of the ANC's first nationally organized expressions of civil disobedience against the apartheid laws.
My brother was very active. He was He was in the Defiance campaign of 1952.
The story goes that Lee's older brother Ezekiel was an organizer in the local chapter of the ANC. Anticipating violence upon entering the white section of Bloemfontein, Ezekiel sent the young Lee back to the township.
Go back.
What Lee didn't tell us, but what I was able to discover here in Bloemfontein, was how Ezekiel and the others were beaten and tortured for weeks.
Lee was my youngest brother. In fact, he was the youngest in the family. And I was the one who took care of him. But Ezekiel, he was the one who influenced Lee to join ANC. He was very much connected with him. In high school, he used to take pictures, a lot, of his colleagues, because that was his hobby.
It was a hobby that Lee used to recruit other colleagues to the struggle.
When we were at home, your father and I were almost inseparable. We are so close that if we stay together when we're still at home, if we stay together until late at night, he happens to be at my home. He'll sleep in my home.
We were together at the high school. At that time it was called Bantu High School. Now it is called Sihunela. That's where we all met.
In 1958, they had introduced the Bantu education. Then the national education that we had was being phased out. So then you knew that from there you are no longer going to have a formal education. That was not going to be formal. Bantu education is not a formal education. You are just taught manual, rituals, what to do, how to make a white man's bed, how to cook and all those things.
They were my students at high school. I saw them grow up. I literally saw them grow up.
Shh. Listen to me. You fail this time, next time you only do better. You understand me? You're not going to give these people that power to destroy you. Hey, listen to me. You have to stay focused. They want to break you down. You have to stand up and fight the system. Yes. My boy.
Yeah, Africa.
My boy.
Yeah, Africa.
Lee and his comrades organized resistance to an oppressive system of exploitation.
Were actually inspired by the liberation or the freedom that came to countries in the north of us.
The whole continent was rising up. It offered a beacon of hope for South Africa. They met in secret to discuss these events and plan how to activate the appetite for freedom among people in Bloemfontein.
My home was the meeting place. We would blow out the candles just to give the impression everybody in the house had gone to bed.
Freedom Charter on top of the table, and it's like these people, they don't want to work with us. We boycott everything.
Here is a school teacher or school boys who had no experience planning how to overthrow the state.
Point by point.
But we try to get that. So, but we have to do something.
Your father was the joker. He always made fun out of every situation. And these serious-minded clubs and copes always wanted to fight him, to say, hey, this is serious business. And he would laugh until we all laugh, and they would laugh too. You know, he was a pleasant character.
I had seen this photograph many times before, but I learned the full story behind it here in Bloemfontein. It was like something out of a spy novel. Lee and Klops formed a singing group that allowed them a premise to move freely throughout Bloemfontein, making connections and recruiting new comrades to the liberation movement. But the police were onto them.
Bloemfontein then was a divided city. Divided in the sense that there's the whites that side, the blacks that side, the colors that side.
In the streets, if a white man approaches, you've got to get out of the way.
My oppression was actually more spiritual, you know, in looking at the future. I wasn't seeing any future. During one of the holidays, I worked for this guy for the whole month in his garden. And then when he was supposed to pay me, he called the police.
Je gaan nie die geld kry nie, man. Jy het nie gewerk toe ek jou gesê het jy moet werk nie. Hoekom en ek het gewerk? Jy het nie hard gewerk nie, man. Ek het gewerk. Jy moet loop. Wat staan jy nog? Jy moet loop. Loop, man.
Now, that guy, I've always wanted to settle the score. In fact, when I was in Dar es Salaam, I would be saying, I become emotional.
The most hideous part of it was the pass law, which made the police to harass us day and night, 24 hours of our lifetime. I think by the brutality of the South African apartheid system, literally made everybody, whether you are educated and uneducated, to realize that no, you have to rise up against the system, or otherwise you are buried.
Demonstrations against the South African government's strict apartheid policies flare into shocking violence. The crowd refused to disperse and began stoning the police, who opened fire into the crowd from behind a wire fence. Between 50 and 100 were killed and hundreds injured.
Just before his 24th birthday, Lee's life changed dramatically, as did the strategies of the ANC.
The national movement, liberation movements were bent in March.
ANC leadership around the country was rounded up, with the exception of Oliver Tambo, who had left the country to begin the ANC in exile.
What we want in South Africa is that our humanity should be acknowledged, that those who are ruling in that country should pay some respect to the concept of human dignity.
One of the disciples, Billy Mokonwani, had met with Nelson Mandela in Johannesburg. Mandela encouraged Billy to return and organize an ANC youth cell in Bloemfontein that would be ready to carry on the struggle from outside the country.
Stay stable. Whatever action may come, you have to hit it just like that.
Good.
Billy left to join Oliver Tambo and set up the journey for the others to follow. His leading signals the birth of the 12 Disciples, the first ANC group to leave Bloemfontein. The burning of their passbooks made Lee and his comrades outlaws in their own country.
The plan to leave was to explore possibilities of education in the first place. In the second place was also to undergo military training, because the ANC policy of non-violence at that time was becoming irrelevant to the struggle.
Since it was a secret journey we were embarking on, we never told any of the relatives. It was just strictly a secret.
My brother and my sister knew, but we were just giving them a skeleton.
He told me, "Hey, my sister, we are leaving." I said, "You are leaving where?" "We're going out of the country." "Out of the country? What do you mean?" He said, "We are going to Ghana."
So it was just that we didn't want it to be spread. So we decided that no, we were going out to go and play a soccer match somewhere, just for the weekend. That's how we left.
We used 2 cars to move out of Bloemfontein, and we're traveling to Botswana.
We're young people full of fight, wanted to come back and fight and liberate ourselves.
I had been tipped to leave. We were told if we went there, we would be free.
Our group was in a eating house. When we noticed that a stranger was talking to one of our colleagues, and after a while, that person ordered us to listen, and he told us that, "Look, gentlemen, Corps has been with a police officer, and the police officer says he is not buying our story. So he wants us to go and report ourselves at the charge office."
They were released on the condition that they return immediately to South Africa.
I remember when we got into problems in Botswana, in a situation like that where you get confused, and others we say, "No, let's go back." The others say, "Go forward." Lee was always very clear that we are going forward, we're not going back.
They headed north to the Chieflands. The Chieflands were autonomous, free from British colonial rule, affording a measure of security for a group of young strangers traversing an unfamiliar land.
Dumelana, re kopa go bona kgosi.
Le bo mang le tswa kae?
Re tswa ka le ko nageng ya Afrika Borwa. Tla lebo. Morena. Khosi re tlhagagele ko nageng ya Aforika Borwa re batho ba ba lwanelang tokologo jaanong re tlile mo motseng wa gago go kopa re amogele seng
Re ikopela dijo thata hela kgosi ya.
The chief received them as sons, but from here on in, they would have to feed themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So they heard that Lee has left with his friends, and they came to ask us which direction he took. It was a regular visit with a squad. Sometimes the police used to come in the early hours of the morning. 1 or 2, anytime they would come to come and ask about him, just harassing us.
The special branch would come with Lee's photograph and say, do you know this person? They'd want to know where they've gone to.
Jy moet vir my sê waar kan ons dit vandag. Dat jy nie vir my gaan sê nie. Vat jou lyf van hierdie plek.
Gaan soek hulle self as jou werk.
Werk! Jou werk is onderwyseres. Maar jy's 'n domkop soos hulle.
Jy's mos die
domkop soos 'n ander ene.
Doen jou bloody werk, jy's die polisieman. My werk is om leerlinge te leer, nie om agter wit goed soos jy aan te loop en terroriste te soek.
Jy moenie dink. Luister vir my. Jy is te hard. Jy dink jy's sterk. Jy het geen toekoms in hierdie land nie. Geen toekoms nie. Dis ons toekoms, nie julle nie.
I still long for those days when I had guts, you know. I had the guts of a lion.
They left home to fight, but in Botswana, all they could do was wait.
I was stranded in Botswana for a while. Our plans ran out, Something went wrong.
No, we didn't know exactly what arrangements were made for us. We were relying on the contact people in Botswana. There was a possibility of, the rumors, sort of, about the plane coming to pick us up and so on.
The late Kwame Nkrumah used to send a plane to pick us up to Ghana.
Independence came to over a dozen states peaceably, but in the Belgian Congo, freedom was followed by rioting.
But a civil war had erupted in the Congo, and the plane could not refuel to continue its journey to Botswana.
Pro-Red Premier Lumumba was seized by the forces of strongman Colonel Mobutu, but the struggle for power was far from over.
Immediately, we started running short of money. We then said, look, guys, what do we do?
We're lucky to have 2 or 3 meals a week. There was no money, nothing. We were starving.
So we didn't have money to travel, we didn't have money to maintain ourselves, so we sold our clothes in Botswana.
Ke le khalemetse ka le bela for ska lana lwana ka ntse le tswela le lwana ha re mamelaneng bana ha re bonnete ba ga mamelana ka ko.
If you interact with Lee, you had better get your acts correct because he was an honest man and he wanted you to be straight in what you do.
We had to find our way out of Botswana to Tanzania. At the time was Tanganyika.
So I was chosen to go and plow the way through.
So we spent about 3 months in Botswana, and then we started living in groups of 2 and 3.
Dar es Salaam, their point of destination, was 1,300 miles northeast, across hostile territories controlled by British colonial rule. To avoid arrest, they traversed the dangers of the bush. And in the towns, they tried to make contact with local liberation movements.
Yeah, you are going to jail tonight.
Those who were arrested were sent back to Botswana, where they regrouped again. Their trek created a path that thousands of future freedom fighters leaving South Africa would follow. As part of the first wave of South Africans to get to Dar es Salaam, the arrival of Lee and his comrades signified that there was a liberation movement in exile.
There was a very small community of South African exiles living in a camp, sort of, called Buguruni.
When we were in Tanzania, well, for some time it was difficult with refugees because there were many refugees in Tanzania. The government had its hands full. And life was very difficult, very difficult.
British rule in Tanganyika will come to an end.
This is a moment of triumph for Mr. Julius Nyerere.
Soon after their arrival, Tanganyika became independent, and there were few resources available for the freedom fighters.
Yeah, you had to have a lot of hope, right? Fortunately, the people like Oliver Tambo, whenever he was in Dar es Salaam, he came to talk to us.
And encourage us to do something ourselves. Some activities that we could use to raise funds. If need be, go to the radio, to some concerts, whatever. That's where we began to organizing a singing group in the camp.
We had one very, very successful concert to which President Julius Nyerere came, and also Oliver Tambo, and high government officials. Lee sang the first voice, Caps alto. They really, really enjoyed our singing. But what really happened after that was that we were then given jobs in government, various departments, so we were able to work.
And life became a little bit normal, in a way.
People saw that this group from Bloemfontein is very cohesive. They work together, they tend to like each other. We didn't do things individually, and we always checked with each other. What is it that we wanted to do? How can we achieve that?
In 1962, after living in Dar es Salaam for more than a year, Lee, who had been so instrumental in keeping the group together, was the first to leave.
Your father went to West Africa. They were given some scholarships there, but things were so bad that they went to Liberia.
Liberia did not honor the promised scholarship. Lee was pressed into servitude on a plantation. He protested and organized a revolt, and was forced to leave. Lee returned to Dar es Salaam to discover that Billy had been killed under mysterious circumstances in London. With Billy's death, youthful idealism ended. Could there ever be a safe haven as long as South Africa was not free?
The ANC, as it began to find itself in exile in Tanzania, then they established a news digest called Spotlight, and Lee became the editor.
He and Tennyson Makiwane and others started some of the very basic magazines and propaganda tools.
I worked in the Department of Publicity for the African National Congress.
Talking with Lee's colleagues made me realize that the battle to liberate South Africa had been complex and would have to be continued on two fronts. One was changing world opinion about the ANC and the South African liberation movement. On the other front, it was preparing for direct conflict with the launching of Umkhonto Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, the military wing of the ANC.
I joined MK at its inception, 1962.
Of course, we were young, we were enthusiastic, we were revolutionaries. The fact that in South Africa, Nelson Mandela and the others had decided to form Umkhonto Sizwe, to us was inspiring. We were the first group of South Africans sent by the African National Congress to Cuba.
In order to get to Cuba, they had to travel north via the Sudan.
When we left Dar es Salaam, the ANC office gave us a letter to give to the Ghanaian embassy. And when he saw it, he decided to put us in a hotel. Within minutes of our arrival, we were met with the biggest surprise of our life.
Mr. Mandela.
How are you?
Fine, and you, sir?
Thank you very much. In Sudan is where I first saw the Scarlet Pimpernel, Nelson Mandela.
We spent one of the most wonderful moments of our lives with him. You know, you could feel when you were talking to him, when you were interacting with him, that not just confidence, but respect is exuding through all his pores. For us, young minds at the time, it was very inspiring to have had such an honor. A month later, when we were in Cairo, he was arrested, and he was to spend the next 27 years of his life in prison.
Mandela's imprisonment fueled their need to fight.
Revolutionary movement, a product of the battles of the African continent.
We arrived in Cuba at the time of the October crisis.
The U.S. threw up a steel fence, prepared to stop any vessel carrying materials.
When the Americans were threatening to invade Cuba.
In Cuba itself, 100,000 men were put under emergency orders.
So we were mobilized into the army. We went to the trenches with the rest of everybody who was mobilized.
For the disciples, Cuba was a mixed bag. Percy Milken began a career that would lead him to becoming a general in MK. But Matthew, a promising boxer, got injured and had to abandon his studies and military training to return to Dar es Salaam. In the meantime, Lee got a scholarship to go to East Germany to study journalism, a tool he would use for the movement.
The program was very good in teaching you journalism and all that, the setting up of a newspaper and all those things. They were very good in that. I learned a lot in that. People were beginning to know black people, and they would go and ask you, can I touch your hair? Can I touch your skin? So those things were there also, I mean, a white person will always be a white person, no matter where you meet him.
In 1965, Lee learned that another one of the disciples, Peter Schwartz, had disappeared in London.
Before, when we came out of South Africa, I used to have a very traumatic dream. Every time when I'm there, I'll be chased by the police until I wake up. I arrived in the States in '67.
The U.S. considered the ANC a communist terrorist organization.
We came here during the Vietnam War. We were involved in the activities of students, especially at Lincoln University. We can say that we finally changed the structure of the black student organization to manifest literally black aspirations. We met a lot of people in different fields of political sphere. We met Muslims, we met the Panthers and Martin Luther King. I finished school, I went to Temple University where I did my television production and my minor in journalism.
In those early days, there wasn't much known about the ANC, let alone about Mandela, who had been in prison for, let me say, in the 70s. It had already been over 10 years of his imprisonment.
It was also a very difficult time because we came here and nothing was in the newspapers about South Africa.
Lee started using Super 8 film to document his community.
We know America is big. There are lots of us here, but whenever there is a commemorative day or anything like that, we all get together. When somebody has lost some family in life, we have that support system. There were a lot of uprisings of the 60s, black uprisings in major cities. In America, it's a very covert racism. In South Africa, it's overt. But then sometimes when you go out, you literally meet overt racism. There's nothing you can do about it. That's where you realize that we are still in South Africa here by any other means. Well, America is still South Africa. Then I came to New York when I met Rudy.
We were primed for Lee to enter our lives.
I was attracted to him because he could dance very well. When I met Lee, I was very much involved in black nationalist movement.
I suppose that the fact that my father always wanted to go to Africa influenced me. And then, of course, in the 60s, we became African, really. We thought of ourselves as African. We looked at the Africanness in us, and that was the beauty in us, and the pride in us. And, of course, we dressed African, we wore our hair African. We ate African. So we wanted to know as much as we can about Africa.
One of the arguments we had at first when we met, he would tell me about the ANC had a non-racialistic policy. And I would say, oh no, you're going to trust those whites there, forget it. And we discussed it and we talked about it, and eventually I came over to his point of view, that you really shouldn't judge by skin color, but that we'd have to look at the person's politics and their goodwill.
I was captivated by my mother's new boyfriend, this handsome revolutionary who taught us about the horrors of apartheid in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela, his imprisoned president of the ANC. Every night when I went to bed, I would will myself to become invisible, grow wings, and fly to South Africa to fight the evil racist. Lee moved in a few months later and was ready to fill a father's shoes. I was desperate for a father's love, but also fearful of a father's betrayal. My birth father had left 2 years earlier. There were many times when he would call up and say he was coming to visit. My brother and I would get all dressed up and wait for him to come. Only he never did. My mother had other boyfriends who I'd grown close to, only to be abandoned by them as well.
I wanted you and your brother Lyle to, like him, and to see him for, the fine person that I thought that he was. And of course, you and your brother Lyle didn't like him because you were very close to me, and then he was not your father.
I think Lee obviously respected us. He cared for us in the way that he could. I think he felt probably could have, perhaps used more discipline. I mean, we have to accept the fact that we were rambunctious and we were outspoken kids. So as adults now, to look back on that, in certain ways, we could have been more sensitive.
You did a lot of little things to make him uncomfortable. And Lee would always say that these children are not like the children in South Africa. The children in South Africa listen. These children don't listen. You and Lyle used to do things like put salt in his shoes and things like that. It was like a Cold War, like Russia and the United States, a standoff. Nobody exploded a nuclear bomb. But it was a kind of a tense situation.
The explosion happened. Lee got drunk, broke a vase, and blamed it on me. But I told him it was his drunkenness that broke that vase. Lee slapped me across my face, and I broke a broomstick over his head. I vowed not to let him terrorize me. Less than 2 years after Lee joined our family, my mother took my brother and I to live in Tanzania, leaving Lee behind in America to pursue his studies.
When I heard Educators for Africa were looking for people to go to Africa, specifically Tanzania, because Tanzania was really the seat of the Pan-Africanist movement, I became very interested in going to Africa.
The other reason I said I would go was because of you and Lyle. Not that you didn't like Lee, but no one's going to like a stepfather. I thought that if I took you to Tanzania, that would sort of give us a break. And then by the time you get back, you would appreciate him more.
Lee's extended family, a community of exiles, embraced us in Dar es Salaam, providing a cohesion of family thousands of miles away from home. I began to think about Lee, separated from his homeland for so many years, and now left alone in the Bronx.
Oh yes, loneliness is part of it, you know. It's part of it. You get lonely, you get depressed, you know. We used to say among ourselves that, you know, when you feel lonely and you feel depressed, get into a shower. You'll start feeling better.
When I finished school, I tried to find a job in television, but America is very hard, especially if you are a foreigner, unless you have had a background in that. That's why I usually find out when they say that experience, and I say, how can I have experience when I've been in school all these years? What kind of experience do you take that to be?
What catches you by surprise? You know, you may know the word, but you are never ready for it. It's nostalgia. Yeah, nostalgia. The feeling of being back home among your people. You know, you feel a thirst that even water cannot quench. You know, when you begin to feel like, you know, yeah. And I'm sure if you are caught alone or whatever, you know, you have a groan that has no sound.
Lee used his Super 8 camera to film any photographs he could get his hands on of South Africa. Holding on to fragments of memory. A mission in limbo.
I managed to do certain things. I ended up being a deputy representative of the African National Congress here.
Looking at this footage now, I sense how deeply Lee must have missed us, and how we had already become so much a part of his life.
We had thought that after 5-10 years, we would go home. And here we were getting into our 30s, our 40s. Many South Africans could not take that.
Being a refugee is a very, very, very difficult situation. Emotionally, physically, takes a toll on you.
There comes a time when you are in exile that you have to live to recognize the realities of the kind of life that one lives. You cannot survive if you do not come down to Mother Earth and recognize that it's very difficult, even if you had wanted, unless of course you want to change the kind of life that you are living. You want to abandon the cause and so on. There's nothing you can do. You have to say, yes, this is what is happening. Nature or fate has decided that this is what will happen to you.
In 1976, after 2 years of living in Dar es Salaam, we returned to the Bronx and to Lee.
Lee and I got married in 1976. The family sent me a beautiful yellow skirt to wear at the wedding, and they were really happy that Lee was getting married.
Everyone was happy to hear that Lee
ultimately is getting married. And we were very happy. We were very happy.
I think that Lee thought of you as his children. And anytime he would refer to you guys, he would refer to you as his sons. He would never say his stepson. I think the mere fact that he was never married before, he married a woman, which was me, who had 2 children, was not the typical African thing to do. So, I mean, he must have accepted you in order to marry me.
June 16th, 1976. Soweto school students staged a mass protest against the use of Afrikaans as an official language. Police opened fire on the students, sparking unrest that left thousands dead.
After 76, many students left South Africa. Lee really was sympathetic with them, so we've had many of them stayed here.
This house, 4133 Paulding Avenue, was like the base of the ANC unit in New York City.
And here we have this short comrade. She was detained last year for a year, and on her release served with the restitution orders. That is the same with the...
Because when our generation, when our wave of exiles arrived, we had people who already had an experience of life in exile and who had already created structures, infrastructure. In a way, they became our bigger brothers and sisters.
At one point, they thought that the office was bugged by the FBI, and so there were meetings here.
We needed secure environments, and Lee's home was open to us as the ANC membership to have our meetings.
The constant stream of strangers made it difficult to have a space of my own. To make matters worse, every Saturday morning, I would wake up to the sound of South African music blaring through our house and into the whole neighborhood. When I mentioned that Lee slaughtered sheep in our backyard to celebrate special occasions, my American friends were absolutely horrified.
I'm eating here traditional African dish. Oh, stop it. Papa, Malali horror.
Rudine always had an open house. And so, in a sense, Lee ceased to be Lee by himself, but it was Lee and Rudine. There was something very solid, very stable, and very reinforcing in that home.
Perhaps I couldn't open up to Lee because he had captured my mother's imagination.
My personal life, my political life, my social life was all involved in terms of the struggle.
If I look at my own kids, I just weep inside to think how much more attention I could have given them, how much more love I could have given them. But that there was no question of doing that. You know, there just was no question of doing that, and I had to pursue. Because the most important thing that I wanted to give them was home. I wanted to give them South Africa.
Once you've been a political animal, it's hard for you to forget that you have to do certain things that are necessary for you to do to enhance the struggle. So if you are not politically conscious, of course, you will just go the other way and forget about everything and do personal things. But most of us, our life has just been guided by political atmosphere at home. That's how it has been.
For Lee, politics was always first, and he was beginning to realize his dream of becoming a political journalist in America.
I found the job at the UN in the anti-apartheid section. It involves producing anti-apartheid programs produced in English, then we adapt them into our various languages to be broadcast into South Africa through radio stations that could be heard within South Africa.
He was my colleague. Lee was very popular with our colleagues at the UN because he sort of got along with everybody because he always liked to smile and joke with people.
I was impressed that he was actually working at the United Nations and doing a good job. He was a journalist. I couldn't imagine little Lee holding that position. And little Lee, now a married man with a home which became the home of activists.
We met a woman from Botswana. Lee and I met her at the UN at a party that was given there. And she says, "Oh, your voice sounds familiar." So he says, "Well, I do the radio, anti-apartheid radio." She says, "Oh, you're the most famous person there besides Michael Jackson."
Beneath the happiness, there was melancholy. Sometimes when I looked into Lee's eyes, all I could sense was a deep longing. When he was drinking and his defenses were down, we could connect sometimes. I became dependent on those moments and almost preferred Lee when he was drinking.
Many exiles, not all of them, but many exiles did use alcohol as a way to ease the pain of not being able to go back.
The most difficult part of being in exile is that you miss home, you miss your parents, you miss your friends, you miss everything that happens at home. And you are also beginning to forget how home used to look like.
Lee's extensive archive gave witness to what was going on back home. Within South Africa, the brutality of the regime intensified. Crackdowns, mass arrests, police abuse, and executions. But the resistance of the South African people also increased. The efforts of Lee and the other disciples culminated in worldwide condemnation of the apartheid policies. Yet despite the protests, marches, and vigils, for the exiles, the dream of being able to return home waxed and waned with the headlines and newspaper reports coming from the front lines. As Lee's dream of returning home got closer, my distance increased. I found myself seeking a place of my own in the world. After graduating from Harvard College, I headed to Europe, where I pursued an education of my own making. Not knowing anyone, I could reinvent myself. I went to Amsterdam, then traveled to Milan. I became a minor curiosity with my brown skin and curly hair, alienated in a sea of whiteness. I headed north to Paris, which had always been a place of refuge for black artists from the diaspora. What I had not expected, however, was a dull ache in the pit of my stomach, an ache, a longing for home. After 2 years, I returned to America and started working as a TV producer and journalist. I think Lee was quietly proud, but that didn't help our relationship. Now Lee's health was increasingly a barrier between us.
My main objection to his drinking was the fact that it was destroying his health, and I didn't really want him to die. Obviously, I loved him, and I didn't want to be left alone. You know, you're going to get very sick from drinking this alcohol. He used to say, "Well, you've got to die sometime."
Lee's hope to see a free South Africa sustained him. It's what kept him alive.
We are going back home, and to those who have supported you in this country, we say thank you very much. You have done us a good service. Without you, we don't know where our children would have been, because your support has been great to us. Continue. South Africa, if we are liberated, will be a country for everybody.
I thought that South Africa would be free because, as the Nigerians said, no condition is permanent. So I thought that it would be free in my lifetime. I didn't know when.
Sisters and brothers, we bring you the warm and fraternal greetings of the leadership and membership of our movement, the African National Congress.
Keep the pressure on, keep the pressure on, keep the pressure on, keep the pressure on.
It was a dream come true.
Lee felt very good about returning home.
Lee and my mother decided to go and live in South Africa.
He looked up all of his old friends. He was sort of like a semi-celebrity there. Everybody wanted to know, what he had been doing, and everybody wanted to see him. And I was excited about going, because Lee would always say that he would stop drinking once he got to South Africa.
Lee's first act upon arriving home was to pay tribute to his ancestors.
When I went back, we've been working on putting a tombstone on my father and my mother's graveyard. So we had been postponing it for years. In the last 2 years, my brother said, "No, don't worry. I think by the time we settle everything on the tombstone, you'll be able to come directly home."
Welcome home, Rudy. We're happy to have you here. You have an open door in your home for all South Africans in New York City. You're welcome home in South Africa, where you belong. You and Pule are just ambassadors in the United States of America. You actually belong to Africa. This is the soil of your forefathers.
Some of us thought with the education after a year or two and 6 months or less of military training, that would suffer, but it never happened that way. It never happened that way. I was out for more than 30 years.
I was in exile for 32 years.
starting October 1960 to December 1992.
30 years is a hell of a time. It's a hell of a time. And people have fought for their rights. And the black people are still struggling because they don't have money and the means. So it's very nice to be home, but then when you see all these things, you realize that, hey, we have still a long way to go from him. We still have a long way to go.
Do you think your family, you have grown children here, do you think they would want to return home?
Well, that I cannot talk for them. That's for them. I know they would like to go and visit, but I know they're Americans, so they are welcome to come anytime they want to.
So you guys are the ANC Youth League, and you're helping to organize these. Come closer. Come in the shop.
Freedom, it means our responsibility is that we should take from where these people left off and continue.
Freedom to me is free self. It comes within. You see, it comes within. When you are free inside, that's where freedom comes. That's where the freedom begins.
We're close up with you guys, and then we're going to have you guys continue to walk, and then you're going to go to Winky Town.
The young people must always remember that there is no today without yesterday, and there is no tomorrow without today. So what left from us who went to sacrifice and forget about toying, get on, build yourself. By building yourself, you are building the country. And what you do, take advantage of what you've got now, because it comes from yesterday, and build for tomorrow.
These 12 from Bloemfontein helped to ignite a movement that swept the world. Raising funds, organizing security councils, launching anti-apartheid missions, and generating armed resistance against an oppressive government. Everywhere they went, the houses, the events, the meetings, helped to create disciples of us all.
I don't want to go anywhere. Life is good in Bloemfontein. I don't want to go anywhere. Life is good in Bloemfontein. I am hanging with the disciples. Can you see them singing their song? Can you see tubes? Can you see me? Can you see them singing their song? Can you see praise? Can you see claps? Can you see them singing their song? Blow my head, blow my head, oh blow my head, oh blow my head, blow my head, blow my head, blow my head, blow my head. symbol what heroes mangawu osblomwayi noma kwenzeni okwehleli ostan blomwayi the boxer, see the general, plus the shy guy, cops smooth player, clubs the smoker, but the seller, was blow my heat. Dupes, the brave, Mujobi, the slick guy, Sitai, the singer, Billy, the foreman, Peter, the son, the most wanted. I says, blow my heat, blow my heat, blow my heat, blow my heat.